Good evening. I'm Teresa Skubik, and this is Forum Daily for Thursday, January 30th. Canada's public safety minister says he's confident evidence against U.S. tariffs being presented to Donald Trump's new administration will break through. David McGuinty is traveling to Washington today to argue that 25% tariffs on Canadian goods would be bad for both countries. Mr. Trump's threat could happen as early as Saturday. Ottawa has prepared multiple options for retaliatory tariffs, depending on what Mr. Trump ultimately does. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has said repeatedly every option is on the table. Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly is also in Washington and will stay until Friday, pressing Canada's case against tariffs.
I had two important meetings today. The first one being Kevin Cramer, who's a senator from North Dakota on the Republican side, and he's the co-chair of the Canada-US Economy and Security Caucus. So we had a good conversation with him, and also I had a very good meeting as well with Marco Rubio, the new Secretary of State. In both cases, we talked about first our border plan and what we're doing to implement it. And we also talked, of course, about our trade relationship and how imposing tariffs would actually hurt Canadians and Americans on both sides of the border.
Almost half of Canada's exports to the U.S. that could be hit by tariffs come from just 6 industries. Statistics Canada says that more than 43% come from sectors including oil and gas extraction and refining, auto manufacturing, aluminum, and aerospace. A 25% tariff applied across the board would increase the cost of those exports by more than $148 billion. More than 77% of all Canadian exports are sent to the U.S. Yesterday, Donald Trump's nominee for Commerce Secretary shed some light on additional trade grievances the U.S. has with Canada. In testimony, Howard Lutnick accused Canada of treating American dairy farmers horribly.
Our farmers, our ranchers, and our fishermen are the best in the world, and they are treated poorly. Canada, as we spoke about, treats our dairy farmers horribly. That's got to end. That's got to end. And if Canada is going to rely on America for its economic growth, how about you treat our farmers, our ranchers, and our fishermen with respect? And so I think the president and our Trump administration is going to improve the lives and is focused on improving the lives of our producers, our farmers, our ranchers, and our fishermen. These are vital. So I'm going to work hard to make sure, as an example, for your dairy farmers, they do much, much better in Canada than they've ever done before. And that is a key focus of this administration.
Because of Canada's system for supply management for dairy products, very little U.S. product is sold in Canada. Most U.S. milk faces tariffs as high as 300%. While discussion about Canada's trade policy on dairy is new for this Trump administration, it was a major point of contention during Mr. Trump's first term. International trade experts say that Canada has the ability to lash back at any U.S. tariffs almost immediately. Canada's usual process is to give industry about a month's notice before enacting any new tariffs. But experts say that the federal cabinet can skip that under Section 53 of the Customs Tariff Act without recalling Parliament. Finance Minister Dominic LeBlanc had said Canada has various options at the ready for different tariff scenarios, but has not said much more. The chair of a new BC cabinet war room tackling the U.S. tariff threat says that the relationship between the two countries has already fundamentally changed. Ravi Kahlon said that the provincial government will work to diversify BC's economy and reduce its reliance on the United States, saying they cannot live 4 years of constant economic threats. Mr. Kahlon told reporters that Premier David Eby directed his ministers to take action, ranging from diversifying trading partners to strengthening ties across the Pacific. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh says he still plans to force a spring election when Parliament returns at the end of March. He says before the voting to topple the Liberal government, he could work with the governing party for about 2 months to rush through Parliament relief measures for workers who could be affected by a looming tariff war with the U.S. Well, all 3 main opposition parties have said they intend to bring down the government in a confidence vote at the earliest opportunity. Parliament is currently prorogued as the Liberals choose a replacement for outgoing Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. All right, don't go anywhere. Up next, a passenger jet carrying 64 people collided with a U.S. Army helicopter approaching D.C. last night, and a search and rescue operation continues in the Potomac River. Stay with us. We'll be right back after these messages. A regional passenger jet with 64 people aboard collided with a U.S. Army helicopter in the air last night while approaching Washington, D.C.'s Reagan National Airport. Both aircraft plummeted into the Potomac River and multiple people were killed. There were 3 soldiers aboard the Black Hawk helicopter. A large search and rescue operation continues in the river for survivors and victims. Among those aboard the American Eagle jet from Kansas were a group of U.S. figure skaters, their coaches, and family members returning from a development camp. Aviation expert John Graddick has more on the crash.
We know 67 people lost their lives in a crash between a CRJ 700 operated by PSA Airlines on behalf of American, flying from Wichita to Washington, D.C., and there was a collision on final approach, landing that aircraft at D.C., and the collision was with a U.S. Army UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter with 3 crew members on it, and both aircraft they collided around 8:45, 8:46 last night on approach, and 64 people aboard the commercial airliner plus the 3 crew members aboard the Black Hawk all perished in that crash. Yeah, commercial airliners in the U.S. have been mandated to apply what we call a TCAS system. It's a collision avoidance system that automatically scans for aircraft that are in the neighborhood of the aircraft and advises both aircraft that there is a potential conflict in airspace and advises the flight crew to undertake evasive action to avoid the potential for a collision. The question that we have for last night was the Black Hawk aircraft equipped with the commercial version of the TCAS system so that the crew on board the PSA airplane could have detected a potential collision. I don't know the answer to that, and I think the NTSB will be investigating that. But it really was one where, the aircraft in the U.S. and in Canada are equipped with this technology to avoid the same type of mistake.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr. struggled at times as he was pressed to clarify his views on vaccines, abortion, and public health priorities in the first of his 2 U.S. Senate hearings in his bid to become America's top health official.
So let's do a quick count here of how, as Secretary of HHS, if you get confirmed, you could influence every one of those lawsuits. Well, let me start the list. You could publish your anti-vaccine conspiracies, but this time on U.S. government letterhead, something a jury might be impressed by. You could appoint people to the CDC vaccine panel who share your anti-vax views and let them do your dirty work. You could tell the CDC vaccine panel to remove a particular vaccine from the vaccine schedule. There's a lot of ways that you can influence those future lawsuits and pending lawsuits while you are Secretary of HHS. And I'm asking you to commit right now that you will not take a financial stake in every one of those lawsuits so that what you do as Secretary will also benefit you financially down the line.
I'll comply with all the ethical guidelines.
That's not the question. You have said
You're asking me, Senator, you're asking me not to sue vaccine pharmaceutical companies. Yeah, you are. That's exactly what you're doing.
Donald Trump had nominated Kennedy to lead the Department of Health and Human Services. Republicans on the Senate Finance Committee expressed hope Kennedy could help reduce chronic diseases. Democrats used quotes and transcripts from his own books to pin him down on several controversial issues.
Did you say that Lyme disease is highly likely a materially engineered bioweapon? I made sure I put in the highly likely. Did you say Lyme disease is a highly likely militarily engineered bioweapon?
I probably did say that.
Did you say that?
And that's what the developer of Lyme
I want all
disease
of our
said.
colleagues to hear it, Mr. Kennedy. I want them to hear it. You said yes. Did you say that exposure to pesticides causes children to become transgender?
No, I never said that.
Okay, I have the record that I'll give to the chairman, and he can make his judgment about what you said. Did you write in your book, and it's undeniable, that African AIDS is an entirely different disease from Western AIDS? Yes or no, Mr. Kennedy?
I'm not sure if I made that.
All right, stay tuned. Up next, U.S. President Donald Trump orders that a migrant detention facility be built into Guantanamo Bay. Stay with us. We'll have this story and more right after the break. U.S. President Donald Trump has ordered the construction of a migrant detention facility in Guantanamo Bay, which would hold as many as 30,000 people.
Today, I'm also signing an executive order to instruct the Departments of Defense and Homeland Security to begin preparing the 30,000-person migrant facility at Guantanamo Bay. Most people don't even know about it. We have 30,000 beds in Guantanamo to detain the worst criminal illegal aliens threatening the American people. Some of them are so bad we don't even trust the countries to hold them because we don't want them coming back, so we're going to send them out to Guantanamo.
Guantanamo Bay has long been used to house terror suspects, a practice that has been criticized by some human rights groups. Later on Wednesday, Mr. Trump's border czar, Tom Homan, said that the existing facility there would be expanded and run by Immigration and Customs Enforcement. The Canadian Border Services Agency says they've intercepted a human smuggling attempt in Ontario's Niagara region as part of a larger border security effort. The CBSA and the RCMP say they caught one person jumping off a moving freight train as it entered Canada in Fort Erie. The intercept came as part of Project Disrupt and Deter. Alberta's premier says that Ottawa should appoint a so-called border czar to work with the United States.
Let me say it again. The one thing that we can do this week, in just the next couple of days, to have the best chance to avoid tariffs is to show clear and unequivocal action to secure the border. This should start with the appointment of a Canadian border czar to work with the new American border czar to jointly crack down hard on fentanyl and illegal migrants. Is this likely to end the threat of tariffs entirely? I don't think so. I think there'll be other things that we will need to work on, and we will do so. But I am convinced, after speaking with dozens of elected U.S. representatives, administration officials, and the president himself.
In response to Donald Trump's tariff threats and his grumblings about the Canada-U.S. border, Manitoba has announced that it will be sending conservation workers to patrol the border. The Globe and Mail's Timur Durrani has more on the plan.
Yeah, so right now, Premier Canoe, he's announced that basically he's taking conservation officers who are regularly staffers that patrol different parts of the province of Manitoba for wildlife conservation and natural resource services. So enacting those things. And, you know, they're now putting them at the border. So they're redeploying them from different positions along the 49th parallel. So the parts of Canada's border that, you know, go through Manitoba's province, that's what Manitoba's doing there. What that looks like exactly, we're not quite sure, because what it's going to do is they're not getting any additional powers. They're not necessarily going to be able to lay criminal charges on their own if they do see any illegal activity, but they're additional eyes and ears, so to speak, on the border for the RCMP and the CBSA. And so that's what they're kind of doing there. They're going to be additional eyes and ears at that point. Now, again, we're also not sure how many exactly are going to be redeployed. So far, only 11 have gotten there. That's very few, right? So it's a very little number. And at this point, we don't know, you know, it seems more just like, you know, look, we're doing this. And that's something maybe Donald Trump will be happy about. And he won't put up these tariffs on us and impact us in this critical way.
We also asked Mr. Durrani what he's hearing from the conservationists about the province's plan to deploy them to the border.
We're not being allowed to talk to them. We're not being allowed to ask them questions. You know, at the press conference, I was quite curious why, you know, the chief executive, sort of Mr. Meadows, who was there, who was supposed to have talked to the media because he was at this media conference. We could have asked him questions, but there was no comments from him. Even when we would ask questions of him, Mr. Canoe would answer those questions on his behalf. In fact, actually, one of the numbers that I'm quite curious about, and this is a number that just keeps getting floated to me from all different sides through the percentage form. So, the Progressive Conservative Party says that Mr. Canoe inherited 30% of a loss into field officers, so these conservation officers. Mr. Canoe said he's inherited 20% of this, and then he's brought it down to 10%. But what that's a percentage of, I don't know. I don't actually know how many physical conservation officers there are in Manitoba at this point, because that number I'm not getting, neither from the union either. It seems it's a little confusing why that number is not there. So it's kind of like this X that we're trying to divide out and trying to figure out. At one point last year, the Conservatives did, which of course were here in Manitoba, the past government, they did say that there were 90 field officers in late December. So that's quite close to what we might think it is the case right now, but we don't know how many there even are on the field at this point.
Coming up after the break, 8 more hostages are freed as part of the ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. And Canada's top doctor is worried about a measles outbreak in Ontario and Quebec. Stay tuned. These stories right after the break. Eight hostages were freed today in the latest release since the start of the ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. 3 Israelis and 5 Thai farm workers were handed over amid a chaotic crowd in the city of Khan Yunis. Israel's release of 110 Palestinian prisoners was delayed due to protests that occurred as they were being handed to the Red Cross. Today's exchange is the third since the start of a ceasefire agreement. Former advisor to Benjamin Netanyahu, Daniel Rubinstein, joined us from Israel for more on the release.
All the people of Israel have been glued to their televisions today as we have been watching the release of additional hostages from Hamas captivity. It's been nearly 16 months since these hostages have been held, and today Hamas released 3 Israeli hostages and 5 Thai nationals. These are people from Thailand who were working in agriculture in the fields near the Gaza border. Hamas took them on October 7th, 2023, and only returned them today. As far as the Israeli hostages who were released, the first Israeli hostage released today was Agam Berger. Agam was an Israeli soldier on the border. She was a lookout soldier. It was her job to keep an eye on the situation in Gaza. She and the other soldiers with her were among the first to realize that the October 7th massacre was happening. There were a group of 5 female Israeli soldiers that Hamas had been holding for nearly 16 months. 4 of them were released a few days ago, and the final one was released this morning. In addition, 2 Israeli civilians were released today. One is a woman named Arbel Yehud, and another, an 80-year-old man from a farming community near the border. Gadi Moses was released today, 80 years old. I have just seen on social media the pictures. He looks defiant and relatively well for someone who's been held by a terrorist organization for nearly 16 months. As far as the terrorists that Israel is releasing, we know that in exchange for 1 female Israeli soldier, Israel has pledged to release 50 Palestinian terrorists from prison. These are convicted Palestinian terrorists, people who have been involved in terrorist attacks against Israeli civilians. We saw an example of the kind of people who were released more than a decade ago in exchange for 1 Israeli soldier, Gilad Shalit. There were 1,000 Hamas terrorists released from Israeli prisons. One of them was named Yahya Sinwar. Yahya Sinwar was released in a previous prisoner swap. He went on to become the head of Hamas and the mastermind of the October 7th massacre. The kind of Palestinian terrorists who are being released in this latest swap include convicted Palestinian terrorists, those serving life sentences, those serving very long sentences for participation in gruesome, horrific terrorist attacks, including dispatching suicide bombers and being a part and an accomplice to terrorist attacks that killed many Israelis. So in exchange for receiving hostages, Israel is paying a ransom that sees the release of people who may be trying to take hostages tomorrow.
Canada's top doctor is concerned about measles outbreaks spreading in Ontario and Quebec. Dr. Teresa Tam says the majority of recent infections in Canada were among people who were unvaccinated. She says many of them were children and infants under the age of 1. Health Canada reported 8 measles cases as of January 11th, but that's since increased to 38 in Ontario and 16 in Quebec. The new head of the CBC is calling for a national conversation on the Conservatives' pledge to defund the public broadcaster. CEO Marie-Philip Bouchard says defunding the CBC could erode a pillar of Canada's cultural identity. She questions whether that would help Canadians and culture as the country faces what she calls potential territorial claims by U.S. President Donald Trump. Ms. Bouchard is launching a tour to engage with business and civic leaders, as well as industry, CBC audiences, and employees. NASA's 2 stuck astronauts have taken their first spacewalk together.
The International Space Station is currently 260 miles above Earth, flying over southern Russia.
Yep, 2/4 passengers on expansion. I'm done.
That sounds right. So you have a go to translate to ESP2 with 5.
Sunny Williams and Butch Wilmore floated out of the International Space Station today, almost 8 months after moving in, and they performed maintenance work. The pair expected to stay just a week when they arrived at the space station last June, but their ride, Boeing Starliner capsule, encountered so much trouble that NASA decided to return it empty. They're now stuck in orbit until SpaceX can bring them home in late March or early April. I'm Teresa Skubik, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for more news on demand, you can always visit our website at thenewsforum.ca. Good night, Canada.